Marci, thank you for doing this with us.
My pleasure.
Good morning, everyone. Just gonna let people trickle in here for a second and then we will get started. Thank you so much for being with us.
Ooh, turn off my cell phone.
Okay, we've got a good amount. We can probably get started.
Jump
here,
in?
BJ. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our latest mental health webinar. This one's all about dollars and cents. We know one way or another that financial suffering is a real phenomenon at the end of life, throughout illness, dealing with illness at all. I think we know that healthcare is still the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy, even if you're insured. I mean, it's complicated. So, and way more than Sonia or I could do justice. So we have a friend of ours with us, Marci Lobel-Esrig, who is a CEO and general counsel of a beautiful company called Silver Bills. And Marci, before I go on, why don't I ask you to tell us a little bit about what it is you do?
Sure. And thank you both so much for allowing me to participate today. I really appreciate it. I am founder, CEO, and general counsel of Silver Bills. Just by way of background, I am an attorney. I've been an attorney for several decades. Most recently, before founding Silver Bills, I was a lawyer for the New York Mets baseball team, the parent company, Sterling Equities. And just a few weeks after I started, the Bernie Madoff scandal broke. And my company lost about $500 million and almost the entire 401k of the company.
Oh.
And I worked on that financial crime for about 8 years as associate general counsel. And I really became an expert in financial fraud and financial exploitation. I had a very unique window into that whole process. At the same time, my elderly aunt was aging in her home on one coast, her daughters lived on the other, and she was struggling with managing her household bills. The process was becoming overwhelming for her as she aged. And when her daughters visited her, instead of taking her out to lunch, they had to spend their precious vacation time wading through piles of papers and documents and mail to identify the critical expenses that need to be paid. So when I researched the overlap of those issues, I learned about the $1 billion annual older adult financial exploitation problem in this country, often perpetrated by individuals who are purporting to help with this process and who go into homes and either steal personal effects or write unauthorized checks. And so I decided to start Silver Bills. And now we have grown into a nationwide company that provides household bill management and budgeting services to individuals regardless of age throughout the United States.
Beautiful. Sorry to hear about the rocky road to learning all these things, but I'm very glad you have, because as you no doubt know, that story of your aunt is not unusual. That's sort of the norm. So, and extra glad that you've decided to take the course that you have with your work. It's a huge piece. In medicine, it's shocking how rarely we bring it up or have any facility to discuss this big issue, and it affects so much of the experience of illness and caring, et cetera. So anyway, well, let's dig in. But before we do that, Marci, let me just mention real quick for the gang, some of you guys are returning, and so you know how these go. But for newbies, just a note here, Marci and I will go over our slides for, I don't know, maybe a half hour or so, just as we say, level setters, just to kind of get the basics in place for us all to have the shared foundation. And then we'll cut it over to you guys for questions and comments. And Sonia will mention that in a second. But just to say, this is really meant to be a safe place to ask and tell just about anything within the confines of kindness and, basic legality. Well, speaking of legality, you've got a doctor here and a lawyer here. So there will be limitations of, we can't dispense medical advice or legal advice, but we can discuss just about anything, broadly speaking. And so don't bite your tongue. This is really meant to be a safe place to talk and think and get your questions answered. So with that, over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, BJ, and thanks for being here, Marci. Really appreciate it. So as BJ mentioned, after Marci and here through the level setting slides, we'll open it up to questions and your questions and comments. And you can do that in two ways, either or. You can raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. Or if you prefer to not do that, you can just type it into the Q&A section and I will read it aloud for you for Marci and BJ to address. So again, raise hand, or you can do Q&A and just type it in and I'll read it for you. And if you would like to remain anonymous, please just let me know in the Q&A section. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sonia. Okay. All right, guys.
There's a comment in the chat. Someone saying, yeah.
Oh, that's about me being the voice of God and being pinned,
okay.
But I'll just be in and out.
Okay. Well, so we've already kind of foreshadowed this a little bit, Marci, but do you want to describe from your end what you see here, how the confluence of these issues?
Yeah, I mean, what you raised before, BJ, was really, really interesting, actually fascinating to me, because there's so much data on the fact that financial issues cause so many health maladies, and it's not really paid attention to by the medical community. And yet it's one of the leading causes of high blood pressure, even coronary disease, the stress of it.
Yeah.
And it is recognized by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid as one of the instrumental activities of daily living. So in other words, when you think of something like Parkinson's or arthritis that makes it difficult to write checks or open envelopes due to macular degeneration and review statements, this is one of really the instrumental activities. It is one of the instrumental activities of daily living that medical professionals really, in my opinion, it's incumbent upon them to pay attention to because it leads to really significant health maladies. So there is a very strong connection between financial well-being and physical health. It's also financial well-being is recognized as one of the social determinants of health, which in our sphere, which is typically Medicare and Medicaid, is recognized as a benefit for chronically ill people if it affects, the social determinant of health. So we really believe in providing that as a service to our clients, that they don't have to suffer in silence when they have struggles with this. We help them, for example, prioritize critical expenses like rent and electric over some more discretionary expenses and make sure that that's being reinforced on a monthly basis. We provide our services via a dedicated account manager. So our clients work exclusively with one individual professional, the Silverbills account manager on the other end of the phone, who's helping them with this process and doing this on their behalf. And we have some very good preliminary data that shows we're having a beneficial effect on financial well-being and thereby physical health.
Ooh, wonderful. That must feel good. Because what a humongous, I mean, this is up there with smoking, and just for the audience, social determinants of health is a phrase you guys may have heard, you may hear more of. I hope we'll all hear more of it. Just a real quick primer on that. The medical system has weirdly, falsely divided medical issues from social issues traditionally, and which is one of the reasons why, as a doctor, I'm not trained in anything to do with finances or housing, or poverty, period. These are huge drivers of health, and yet they don't generally typically make their way to the list of things that doctors worry about, which is nuts, as we're saying here. And so companies like yours, conversations like ours, are meant to begin to build bridges between these things that are naturally related, but we've kept separate in the healthcare world.
Yeah, I mean, you think of something like homelessness, how does that affect physical health, right? And that's where, that's a very stark example, I think, of the financial aspect of health.
Right. So social determinants of housing, finances, et cetera, environments that you live in, violence, domestic, all sorts of things that related to your environment. There's one other thing I was going to say about that, but I'm spacing. But We'll come back. Okay, let me move us on here. Lovely picture. So I'm assuming, Marci, that a lot of these conversations you're having are with the entire family. Is that a fair assumption, or
Yes. So
out?
we provide services, as I mentioned, throughout the United States. Originally, we were targeting older adults. And what's actually increasingly becoming apparent is that people of all ages want help with this task. And what we are is we're a service that's analogous to other professional services, like, for example, an accountant. You may hire an accountant who's using software to prepare your taxes. You know that person and can interact with them, and they're using software, or an attorney to do, for example, legal documents. That's what we are. We're individuals powered by our own software to manage the bill paying and household budgeting process. Increasingly, it's younger people who want to outsource this, because if they forget to pay, for example, their homeowner's insurance policy and that's terminated and there's a fire and there's no way to get compensated for that, right? We have multiple policies of insurance. We guarantee correct and complete payment. But within families, first of all, the demographic we had originally targeted, which are older adults, 1/3 are considered solo-agers. So they actually, this is a typical task that was handled by adult children, primarily the daughters, to be quite honest. With the solo-agers that are, tens of millions now in the country, there aren't those volunteers in many cases to help with this. So we're serving as that primary point of assistance with this task of financial caregiving. For the other part of the demographic, it is very complicated with the family dynamics. Often older adults want to retain autonomy over their financial lives. And that's where it's beneficial to bring in a professional to help with some of the things that we do. But in our culture, there's a lot of secrecy around finances, particularly with this older adult population. And it's been fascinating to me in creating this company to look at some other cultures where that really isn't the case. Some other cultures, people will say, "What's your salary?" and discuss that openly. That's a taboo in the United States, as is many of these other topics of finances among family members. So, that's often a difficult topic for families to address in a direct way. And so it's complicated. We have a service agreement that's signed by our clients, and we can't release any kind of information to anyone unless we're authorized by that individual client. However, we do always encourage our clients, if they have family members, to include them as much as possible.
I think I read recently, this may be something like half or 50 or more than half of elders over 80 live alone in this country. I don't know if it's that high, but it's not a small number of people who are either estranged from family or don't have family. Is that your experience too?
Yes, there is, and that actually adds to the component of loneliness. That's really an epidemic, which is another, one of these social determinants of health. In fact, we often serve as that, weekly or every other week check-in with our clients who say, you're one of the few people that checks in on me and cares about me, which is kind of a byproduct of what we're doing. I mean, that wasn't, intentional at the outset of starting this company, but we are providing that service. But yes, the aging journey is very lonely for many in this country. And again, when we look at other cultures and societies, that's not always the case.
Yeah. All righty. Let's move on to the next here. So what to say here, Marci?
I'm just smiling at the image there.
By the way,
yeah.
Marci, Sonia finds these images. It's one of her on her list of many talents. I love every time we open these slides. So it's exciting to see what's waiting. Yeah.
That must be California where there was an earthquake, maybe. We were joking before about that to the audience who wasn't on that part of the call. Yeah, I mean,
Marci's in New York, guys. So
in general, I think financial gaps are something that should be addressed. Obviously, is the sooner the better in terms of financial planning. We've many of us probably have heard the guidance that, the sooner you start saving for retirement, like with your first job, the easier the journey will be. But it's never too late. And it's never, this often, the whole topic of finances causes a lot of anxiety among individuals. People worry they haven't done enough, and they prefer to, put their heads in the sand and not really address this. And so financial gaps are one thing that cause a lot of anxiety and stress. My advice here would just be, there are ways and creative ways to fill in those gaps, even certain retirement deficits. So the sooner that these are addressed, the better. There are insurance products, there are various investment products that potentially have a way to solve whatever gaps there are. And my advice would be to just address a plan with a professional sooner rather than later. Silverbills does not do any planning. We're not professional investors or investment counselors, but we work hand in hand with those professionals. And we basically are working on the expense side. We're experts in expenses, prioritizing expenses, budgeting. We work with, monthly budgeting with our clients, making sure there's compliance. And so, in terms of the gaps, we work holistically in general with financial professionals and investment counselors to cover those gaps. And my advice would be the sooner the better.
Well, amen to that. But that reminds me of, it's not infrequent that when I was at UCSF to see a lot of patients who, thanks to the modern marvels of medicine, were far exceeding, living beyond their prognosis and living beyond what they had planned for financially. And it was always, and again, not a rare moment, where someone would get a scan that their cancer was in remission, which generally, celebratory news as a rule, but which in fact was very depressing news for people, because living longer was not, they were running out of money. They did not plan for this remission. When they started their cancer journey, it wasn't likely possible, et cetera. So to your point, starting early and probably revisiting these plans over time is essential, because the world changes and our situations change. Yeah. Those conversations are really striking. Okay, well, let me move us on.
Quick question, BJ, before you do that. Someone just said, what are some examples of financial gaps? So Marci, I'm not sure if you have any just like very concrete things that you've experienced.
Yeah, well, one of the major, I think, financial stressors that families experience are providing for home health care. And so there is, in some cases, and not all, and this is an industry in crisis, long-term care insurance potentially. So that's something that if people obtain those policies earlier rather than later, it's usually the prudent way to proceed, although many people can't qualify or they're financially cost prohibitive. But that would be one example, because there is not a lot of education or knowledge about the fact that many, many individuals will need some form of home health care. And so people sometimes are under the impression that there's some kind of government programs that will pay for that. There are, for example, 7 states where if you do exceed the Medicaid income requirements, you can potentially put your money in what's called a pooled income trust. The specifics of that are really too complicated to address here. But Medicare typically doesn't pay for long-term care in the home. And this is a real gap that we as a country and many, many families are facing and will increasingly continue to face as our population ages. And so that is one example.
And following on that, Marci, I think a lot of people presume, maybe they understand that hiring home health gets expensive quickly. And then they say, well, okay, worst case scenario, I need to go to a nursing home. But nursing homes ain't cheap either. So those require financial planning to afford as a general rule too.
Yeah, every state is different. The process for nursing home care is different. You know that as a physician. And there are different types. There's Medicaid, there's private, so these things are complicated. And that is one example of a financial gap that's best addressed sooner rather than later.
And that's hearkening also to the prior slide about these are where there is family, whether family by choice or by blood, your inner circle, if you're lucky to have one, these conversations, so important to happen. I'm assuming with family while everyone's still alive. It's not on. I've spent a lot of time with families who didn't have those conversations, and then they're learning about the, through the will, who's getting what, whatever else, and lots of surprises, lots of heartache that could have been obviated by conversations along the way.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. And also during the time of a medical crisis, I mean, that's just a whole other level of stress. So to be faced with the issue of, for example, who's going to take care of mom and dad when they leave the hospital or whatever, and how are we going to pay for that? It's just a more stressful time to entertain that kind of conversation, I think.
I totally agree. My experience, that's not a time, a crisis mode is not a great time to be having conversations like this, or any really. And that's very much the norm. That's sadly when these conversations happen, if they ever do, very often. Okay. So yeah, this gets tricky. There's just so many different pieces of these puzzles. And when, as lay people, when should we think to reach in which direction?
Okay, this is a very broad question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm really qualified to answer all of this, but I mean, healthcare professionals and caregivers, I think that's your purview. I mean, that's kind of goes without saying. A CPA/tax advisor, the sooner the better. I mean, hopefully many people on this call already have that. Trustee, executor, and estate attorney, just broadly, in most states. And so I can't really give legal advice also because, every state has its own set of laws that govern, for example, wills. But if an individual, this is very general, it's not legal advice. If an individual does not prepare a will properly and execute it prior to passing away, basically the rules of the state law will govern how the assets are handled. And most individuals want to have a say in that process. So really the earlier the better in terms of a will. And then, it depends on the complexity of the financial situation and the state. I mean, this gets very complicated in terms of planning for long-term care, et cetera. So I would just say, find a reputable, qualified elder law attorney and/or trust and estate attorney to help with this process. A wealth manager, that's a field that's highly regulated. There are very different types of individuals who help with this process. Some are fiduciaries that are not paid by commission based on sales. Others are commission based. So that's just kind of very broad strokes in terms of a wealth manager, but and some have minimum requirements. So it really, really depends on your particular situation. Insurance brokers, I mean, a wise person once said to me, you can never have enough insurance. So, finding someone in this area who you trust to provide some guidance with respect to different kinds of insurance that might be necessary, and household help and property managers kind of just goes without saying.
Marci, I'm glad you used a word a moment ago that maybe we should pause for a second, because it has some specific meaning, is the fiduciary. Yeah, can you open that up with us a little bit?
Yeah, so very broadly, a fiduciary in general is someone who has the best interest, not their own best interest, but is required to exercise the best judgment with respect to the interests of the person they're representing. So that's what a fiduciary is.
So are like silver bells, are you guys fiduciaries per se, or is that different?
So we're not required to be fiduciaries because we're not making any kind of discretionary decisions on behalf of clients. We're following the direction of a client specifically, and we're not like investing. Typically, it's referring to an investment professional or a wealth manager. So certain types of investment professionals are commission based, and so they're not necessarily fiduciaries. I mean, I'm speaking very broadly here, and it's kind of incumbent upon individuals when they retain someone who has discretion over any aspect of their finances to do that kind of research. But that's kind of the general purview of the category of fiduciaries.
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, I know we're asking, there's huge here. So thank you for humoring the generalism here. But that fiduciary word comes up a fair amount, like couples I've ever worked with, when, when one, perhaps the person who's always handled the finances, always paid the bills or whatever, is the first to die, sometimes it can be very helpful for the widow or widower to have the help of a fiduciary, just managing bill paying and just the work of daily.
Right. So I think what you're referring to is a professional fiduciary. So there are, I think, 3 states in the United States, and I assume that the people on this call are from all over the country. I'm not sure if they're just from California.
Yeah.
There are only three, I believe, states that have this licensing opportunity where there is someone who can become a professional fiduciary. So I think that's what you're referring to.
Gotcha.
So it really, it warrants some further research into the laws and availability in your state of that potential.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marci. I really do appreciate you going above and beyond in these broad strokes with us here.
Sure, absolutely.
Medicare versus Medicaid. I think a lot of us don't know the difference. From your point of view, we can talk about the medical differences, but how about from your point of view, how do these look different?
So Medicare, okay, again, this could be a topic for a few weeks of conversation. But very, very broad. Yes, very, very broadly, Medicare is generally based on age. So once individuals turn a specific age, they're eligible. Medicaid is income-based, regardless of age, and so it's typically based on a poverty level individual, and it's basically an insurance program for providing medical care to individuals throughout the United States. And then, I think the two of us can probably talk about just the medical system, and I think it's fascinating. And also, I always think it's useful to look at other countries. We have one of the most complicated, expensive systems. Whereas I think there was something on Twitter the other day about someone was trying to explain the concept of a deductible to a writer in Japan, and he just could not even understand that concept. I mean, in some countries, there's nothing like this. And if you're sick, you go to the doctor and there's no issue of paying and what you're qualified or the deductible, eligible, et cetera. It's such a complicated system. And, Medicare and Medicaid is one aspect of that. So it kind of, as people are approaching, for example, I probably people on this call approaching that age in this country, then it's really requires an education, and that's it's a big task, but as people face 65, they really have to try to learn as much as they can about Medicare. If they're Medicaid eligible already, that's a different topic. There's also dual eligibles, so that's a whole other area. So it's all I can say about this is it's very complicated, and try to do as much research you can and learn what eligible programs you can benefit from. Right
on. I suppose that's probably where we should leave it. There's just too much to say, so we'll try not to say too much. All right. Budgeting, that's something I suck at. I mean, imagine. So how do you work with people? Because you kind of have to tailor, I'd imagine you need to kind of titrate or tailor to life expectancy as well as sort of needs. How do you handle that?
So we're actually being included as a benefit in 2 Medicare Advantage plans. Wonderful. For plan year 2023. And one of the directors of one of the plans said, wow, this is amazing because we get pitched all day long to include apps, and you guys aren't an app. I mean, we do have an app, we have a full computer interface, but what we are is really people on the other end of the phone. And our professional account managers work with each client to arrive at a monthly budget and then try to, help them comply with that on a monthly basis. And oftentimes that includes their professional financial advisor so that we can project expenses, et cetera. But when we talk about budgeting, typically at Silver Bills, it's the monthly expenses and categories. And again, in our country, we don't really talk about this. We don't really talk about discretionary versus non-discretionary outlays of money and savings and what is, recommended, et cetera. So this is something we do. with our clients. We know them very well and we work with them and, kind of bring it out in the open. And every month they receive, the numbers that they've spent and how that complies with their budget. And whether you work with silver bills or not, I think this is just, really critical for people to focus on budgeting and being open with themselves about it.
Tricky stuff. I'm gonna say something that's gonna sound probably really cynical, but really true enough. Sometimes in my work, I've had the feeling that the American way of preparing us for our deaths, we don't talk about it much, but the weird way that we do actually prepare people for dying is make living so incredibly complicated and frustrated that by death feels like a relief. Like, at least I won't have to deal with my friggin' bill anymore, or my blah, blah, blahs anymore. Like, I don't mean that as a joke. I mean, that honestly comes up in conversation as a reason someone's ready to die. It's a kind of a stark.
It's so tragic, isn't it? That in this country, in many cultures, people don't have to worry about the big component of budgeting often is the medical expense part of it.
You got it.
And how sad is it that that's something that people have to think about in that stage of life? I'm going to bite my tongue and move along here on that one. So this is really, really important. Most individuals want to, the term of art is age in place. They want to stay in their homes. But this is a consideration. And I think, do we have time? We're really, we're having such a great conversation. I just want to make sure that we have time for questions, but if we do have time, want to share my screen so I can show people. Shall we do that, BJ?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's do it, Marci. Yeah.
So this is, this will stop other screen share. Okay. So this is, it's called the Elder Index. And it's just at elderindex.org. So what this allows you to do is plug in your specific features. So why don't I just do that now here, let's say. I'm going to just randomly, and then let's say a couple, I'm going to say there's a mortgage. Let's say excellent health. I'm making this up, right? And then if you apply it, it will give you actually the numbers that you will need in all of these different categories to age in place. So 3,000 for housing, 690 for health, transportation, etc. And so it's a really valuable way to figure out how much it's going to cost you to live where you want to live. Let's do something quickly, just another state here. Let's say Acadia Parish and single, renter, good health. So in this case, $511 versus whatever that was, 3,000. This is a tool that the University of Massachusetts at Boston has created. These are colleagues of ours, and it's just very, very valuable. It will only cost you $22,000 and change a year in Acadia Parish, Louisiana, if these are the applicable factors. So I would just suggest
awesome.
that people look at this Elder Index. Do you want to get depressed and we put in San Francisco?
Yeah. Or New York, young lady.
All right. Okay, let's see. We'll do this area. We'll say couple, let's say homeowner, we'll say good health. So just the cost of housing is $2,500, more than $2,500, whereas in Louisiana it was $500. That was for a renter, but still. I just think it's a very valuable tool because there is a lot of variation in the geography in terms of expense to age in our homes.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we did that. That index is wonderful. I'm glad to know about that. Again, guys, we'll put that in our resource list.
It's totally free and anyone can use it.
Beautiful.
Very helpful guidance.
Awesome. Okay. Credit scores, credit repair.
Just the general category. People are entitled to, obtain their credit scores for free. They should be checking those because it affects your ability to borrow. It's always a good option, depending on the specifics of the financial plan and needs to be able to borrow at a lower rate. So that's just the general concept of credit scores and credit repair. And if needed, credit repair can be implemented. We work with a third-party organization that's a not-for-profit that helps individuals come up with payment plans to repair their credit. And we've been very successful in helping individuals after a time period increase their credit scores.
Awesome. How often, is there a rule of thumb, how often one should check their credit? Is it?
Yearly is really what's recommended.
Got it.
You know, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but I think that's kind of the guideline.
Gotcha. Okay. Is that our last slide? Oh, no, got some more long-term care. Well, you referenced this earlier, kind of a industry, and isn't it kind of going away? Or I'm sorry, long-term care insurance, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, the long-term care insurance industry is definitely in crisis.
Yeah.
It's very expensive right now, depending on age and other factors, to obtain these policies. But it's kind of, society has kind of put its head in the sand in terms of, well, what are we going to do now? Right? People can't, exercise on these policies. They can't obtain them. Who's going to pay for this?
Yeah.
So it's going to be incumbent upon individuals and families to come up with a solution for paying for long-term care on their own in some other way.
Wow, it almost made me just want to cry when you said that.
No, it shouldn't make you want to cry. It should just make you want to plan and save.
Yeah. Okay. Good reframe. Thank you. Okay. And by the way, the long-term care insurance industry, I mean, I think the reason why it's in decline essentially is because, well, this is sort of the weird thing that happens with medicine. Medicine's successes in helping us live with things that would have killed us, live longer with things that we can convert terminal illness into chronic illness. Those are all medical breakthroughs. But we as a society, those aren't necessarily, like we said earlier, those aren't necessarily good news. That means you're going to be on the planet with expenses and perhaps compromise ability to work too. So it gets, the good news and bad news is all kind of jumbled together in this. And is that basically the gist of why the long-term care insurance industry is increasingly insolvent?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these lifespans were unanticipated, and the exercising of the policies, are causing really financial havoc on a lot of these companies.
Yeah. Right on. Well, this is also why we need to look beyond the healthcare system, beyond traditional sort of healthcare, beyond insurance, and back to family, friends, neighbors. We need to be kind of working on this on all fronts. There's no one sector that's going to sort of save us all on this. So it is kind of one of the upshots might be that it begins to encourage a revisiting of community on some level. And I see this happening to some degree. People having larger conversations about who's going to care for each other earlier in life, families moving together. We'll see how this all plays out, but it's tricky stuff. Okay. After death. So finances don't stop at the moment of death. Debts don't stop, etc. So where should we go from here?
Again, this is like a very broad topic that we could spend a few hours on, but in general, the document should be identified. Every state, it varies based on state law, what's required. You generally need a certificate of death, and then there's a process, and if there's a will, it should be identified, and typically, depending on the complexity of the situation, the attorney who is involved with that can be involved as well. So it doesn't stop, and it is a process that has to be attended to by someone, whether that's a court appointed someone, or court involved, or family. It is a process.
It is. There are, in another way, I mean, this comes up with families a lot, which if you impress upon a person that they should prepare for their death, sometimes that just doesn't register with a lot of people. But if you help them understand that they're doing their family a big favor by tending to these issues before they go, to lighten the load after their own death, that can be a very compelling argument to kind of hop to. It's also, earlier slide, that mega slide of all the various things to think about on there was like trustees and trusts. And one thing that Sonia and I, together with our co-author Shoshana Berger, we learned when we were working on our little book of how, like probate, for example, hugely complicated, and all the more reason for us to put our stuff in a trust. And when you hear the word trust, I think a lot of people think mega wealthy. These aren't necessarily issues of just the super rich by any stretch. So anyway, probate's something that can be avoided. But even if you do all that, there's still closing of accounts, etc. I'll make a plug-in. I should note here, there's a company called empathy.com. I'm an advisor to them, full disclosure, but I love what they've done. They've come up with an electronic way to help you close down accounts after a loved one or family member's death, which can be take mind-numbingly long. But they have figured out a way to do that with a swipe of a thumb. So there are some innovations around navigating all this stuff. And then to say nothing of the emotional load of grief itself and how the really complex stew of these closing accounts and financial issues on top of just the very basic work of mourning someone. So here again, nothing easy. I'm looking at the chat room. Can you repeat this? Oh, Sonia, you got that. Never mind. Thank you. Oh, that was the last slide. Okay. All right, I'm going to come out of the slides, guys, and let's see, comments, questions. Anyone want to cry together? Anything about all the complexities here?
Yeah, we did have some questions come in, and one of them is about long-term care. This person said, my siblings and I have invested quite a lot now on a monthly basis for our mother's long-term care insurance. Yet that care insurance is not paid off to date, even though she fell, broke bones, was hospitalized, then in need of some home visits, but our long-time insurance covered 0 of these expenses. So my question is long-term care insurance meaningful or worth it? Should we bail now after investing so much, or hang in there?
It's a very complicated question and a very complicated answer. I can't really give specific advice to that. I would recommend really identifying a trusted financial advisor who can, do an analysis of that. It's really a case-by-case basis and beyond, I think, the purview of this presentation. But hiring someone or working with someone who can help with that would be, I think, a good idea.
And I'm sorry, Marci, you said a second ago, what kind of professional is it? An insurance broker or?
I would actually have that analysis done in the connection with a full financial plan. So, financial advisor.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Great.
What else, Sonia?
Yeah, this one is a little, this one's going to be interesting. This person said, would either of you be willing to share your stories of what you have done personally to prepare for death and dying at this stage in your life? And as an adjacent question, what is your highest vision of what is missing in the field and what we need more of in our society to support people as they age? In other words, what doesn't exist that you would like to see emerge?
Woo!
Yeah, good one.
Huh. Well, I'd like to kind of light a cigarette and think about this one for a while.
You can't be serious about smoking.
No, that was a joke. That was a joke. But this is going to take a lot of thought. But Marci, I'd love to hear your answer. I'll jump in.
So, I mean, it's a really good question. I have children. So when my children were born, we did spend a lot of time, the short answer is it depends what stage of life you're at, right? So when I had children, we spent a lot of time deciding on who would basically, raise them if we both died, and we memorialized that. We had a will, etc. And we put certain, we addressed certain insurance issues, life insurance, etc. So it really, my kids are getting older now, etc. So it really depends on what stage you're at and also what state you live in. There are also legal documents that can empower people to make medical decisions for you, end of life decisions, etc. So we have those as well. And I think that that's, really important for people to address at this stage. So I would say like a will and, healthcare proxies, et cetera, depending on your state. Those are two basic things that I think that I've done, and I think most people should do as well. And then for us, like, a general financial plan, really critical and really important, no matter what stage you're at.
Mhm.
But some of it does depend on your age, your family situation, whether you have children, whether you have a significant other, et cetera.
Beautiful. Yeah. My answer is, so far what I've done is I've done what you're pointing to, Marci, in terms of the advanced directives, sometimes called a living will, in which I've named my healthcare proxy and my wishes for my own care at the end of life, or when I can no longer speak for myself. I've done some, I put my stuff in a trust. So things to avoid probate for whoever survives me. And then I've done some basic financial planning with a financial planner. So that's what I've done. And I should say, I'm very lucky. My parents are still with us and we still talk. And my dad he's a whiz with finances. So I get a lot. I'm very lucky to have a dad who helps me think these things through too on the financial front and plan for them. And manage the managers around. It's also like, it's not like you find a wealth advisor and just forget about it. It's sort of all of these things take engagement.
The other thing that I didn't mention, which I don't know if you have also, is life insurance. So
Mm.
depending on we have that. So depending on your family situation, that's something that I think is a good thing to think about as well.
Yep. Well, now that second half of that big question, what would we like to see? Sonia, can you reread that part of the question?
Yeah. In other words, what doesn't exist yet or
Mm.
doesn't exist enough that you would like to see emerge?
There's so many.
God, my list is long. Yeah.
In general, I think, we did talk a little bit, and I don't know if this is exactly responsive to the question, but you mentioned before, BJ, how so many people are living alone. I would really like to see more co-living at this stage of life. I think it would solve a lot of these issues, both financial, loneliness. It's so many. I mean, the home health aid aspect of it that is so cost prohibitive and expensive could be shared among multiple people. And, there are some startups in the age tech space that are starting to address this, but that doesn't really exist. We're not having major conversations about analyzing why are we all living alone in our homes by ourselves for these, this period of time. And I think that would be great.
I'm with you. Other favorites are, well, really building on what you're saying, the whole direct care workforce, which is not a great phrase, but that's the sort of term of art to cover home health aides, personal care attendants, nursing assistants. It's technically the lowest rung on the professional caregiving ladder, and a lot of that work gets done informally or is paid under the table. It is an enormous industry, pseudo industry, and it's poorly regulated, it's poorly supported. This is incredibly difficult work, but it helps respond to the issue of loneliness. It helps respond to healthcare utilization, keeping people out of hospitals, out of nursing homes. So anyway, if I sort of, as I sit here today, ask me tomorrow, I might have a favorite one, but that one right now, if we figured out a way to really support the caregiver ecosystem, that could be an enormous driver. But I'm with you around housing and this sort of a attitudinal shift that goes with all this, to move beyond this sort of reductive American ideal of individualism, to temper that with the realities of what it means to be dependent on each other. So I think if I had to pick one, it would be a sort of a mind shift that undergirds all of these other issues and systems. So, boy, but that's a great, rich question, and the answer is very long. Total overhaul of healthcare would be on the list. So, yeah. Anyone in the audience jump in too on that?
I actually referenced age tech. Someone had a question what age tech was, so I just put in the chat. We're part of the, for example, Silver Bills is part of the AARP Age Tech Collaborative, which is a curated group of startups and other organizations interested in bettering the aging experience by incorporating technology developments. And so that's what I mentioned with age tech. I put it in the chat.
There's also, and I've heard this phrase, longevity economy.
Yes. Well,
it's a little different.
I think that the statistic is the 65 and over community in the United States, if it were its own country, would have the third largest economy after the United States and China. So when people refer to the longevity economy, at least from this American perspective, it's a huge market opportunity.
Yeah, these demographic shifts undergirding or underlying that this longevity economy. And we are these next 20, 30 years, we're going to have a historically old population. So these issues are going to become, I mean, the good news, bad news is the things we're talking about here are going to become less and less exotic. This is going to be more and more common conversation because the percentage of us living in the community will be older and living with multiple chronic illnesses, et cetera. So the good news, bad news is, and this is what's lovingly, or I don't know, lovingly for me, and it referred to as the silver tsunami, we are just at the beginning of. So yes. These issues are going to be coming out increasingly out of the closet. And as scary as they are, well, shining light on them, then of course will bring interest and attention in markets and all sorts of stuff too. So let's see, we shall see together.
Yeah. There's a reference here to a Facebook group called Elder Orphans. So Elder Orphans is kind of like an older way of describing that community. The current description that I've heard lately is solo-agers, because elder orphan is, the implication is kind of a sad one, but solo-agers is empowering, I think, and there are a couple of leaders in that community people can find both in Facebook and other venues.
Right on. Okay.
We do have another question. Yeah. Just one other one came in while you guys were talking. This person said, what are your thoughts about data and identity protection? Can bill pay management open someone up to exposure?
So it depends what service you use. You know, there are, as I mentioned, informal providers who come into the home and there's really no scrutiny of what they're doing. Just I can speak from what we do at Silver Bills. I mean, by the way, we have a close to $2 million grant Silver Bills received from the National Institutes of Health, the National Institute on Aging. We're in the process of working to obtain another $2.5 million grant. And with that, we've built some incredible technology tools to prevent, or to safeguard the data that we access. So it really kind of depends on who you're using to provide the service, is the short answer to that question.
Great.
I have nothing to add to that one. Any other ones out there, Sonia?
I think that is it for the moment. And oh, wait one sec. This person said, what books have you read that have inspired you most around this topic? Any book suggestions, or, we can go beyond that, videos, documentaries, websites?
Well, there is, I'm just Googling. This is kind of a sad one, but there's a nonfiction film about the guardianship crisis in Las Vegas, Nevada, that is just really heartbreaking. And it's actually a complete crisis that very few people are paying attention to. And that's, let me see if I can get a link to it, but it's not it's not the fictional account. It's the nonfiction description of, here, it's a documentary. I'm going to get to see if I can put a link here to it. And it's a very, very scary film about the issue of abusive guardianship in Las Vegas, Nevada. Hopefully everyone can see that. And then do you want to add something before I talk about another?
No, please go.
there's a fictional book called A Man Called Ove, and that came out a few years ago, just about this period of time in a person's life of aging after the passing of one's spouse. And I thought it was really touching.
I would like to second that one. That is a great book. Yeah.
You can put it in the chat.
And these will all be in our resources, right? Too, Sonia?
Yeah, we'll send them out in an email as well. Yep.
Great. I mean, gosh.
Oh, I'm also Atul Gwande on being mortal.
Mhm.
I'm sure you have all.
That's a great one. That will give you a nice taste of the healthcare system and the sort of well, not just the healthcare system, but it will touch on a lot of how you understand how healthcare works in this country and what it takes for someone, even like a surgeon who's very adept in it, to understand the shortcomings of it. And this is going to sound really lame, but here goes. There's our book, A Beginner's Guide to the End, which Sonia and I worked on with Shoshana Berger, and there's a lot of sort of practical stuff in there that I think is helpful. The 5 Wishes, Frank Ostaseski's book, really helps kind of get it underneath a lot of this practical stuff, the sort of spirit of care, or how to begin to work with mortality in our lives. There's some great films too. We'll keep our thinking caps on. We'll put this into the email.
That was a great question, though.
Yeah,
it's a good one.
Yeah,
Well,
and that actually also gets at, sorry, I was just going to say, this also gets at one of the earlier questions about what would we like to see. I mean, it's sort of, because we live in this wild time of there's access to information is insane. I mean, we have the internet, just all this decontextualized information. So maybe, and there's all these beautiful organizations, Silver Bills being one of them, doing really great work that we just need some distilling force and a curating force for all that's already out there. I love this thought of nothing new for a year or two, and let's just find out how to work with what we already have, because there's a lot. It's just a matter of finding it. Okay, well, guys, it is time to go. Any last comments from you, Sonia, or you, Marci?
No, just thanks for being here. That was really wonderful and very informational. So excited to post this for others to see. Yeah, thanks for being here, Marci.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Have a great Thursday.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Marci.
Thank you. Bye-bye.